Welcome back to Face the Nation. We now go to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. She's a Democrat from New York and the newest contender in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. She joins us this morning from Des Moines. Senator, welcome to Face the Nation.
Thank you, Margaret.
You have said that you are a no on the president's proposal here to end the shutdown. Why isn't the offer of 3 years of protection for DACA and TPS recipients enough of a start for you?
Well, he's the one who got rid of DACA protection in the first place. And to offer a temporary respite, it doesn't. If you talk to any DACA recipient in America today, they're anxious, they're worried, they're concerned. They might be at school, they don't know if they can finish school. They might be getting married. Their lives are being upended, and this president has no compassion. So I don't think you should even consider this because it's 3 years. It's just DACA. Why not all the dreamers? Why not a permanent pathway to citizenship so they actually can have certainty about their lives? What it really shows is his lack of compassion and empathy for people that are suffering. And I think it's a non-starter.
The president said this morning in a tweet that amnesty could be part of a broader deal down the line. Do you take him at his word on that?
No, I don't. I don't take him on his word on anything. If he really cares about this, he would open up the government, stop the 800,000 people that didn't get a paycheck last week, stop their suffering. Some people can't pay for medicines, food, heat, mortgages, rents. It just shows a callousness that is unacceptable. And so open the government, pay the people, pay our public servants, and then get to the business of talking about a comprehensive immigration reform. But to offer him a 3-year DACA deal is just not, it doesn't accomplish what we need to accomplish. It's not enough, and I think it's cynical.
An RNC spokesperson issued a statement after you declared your candidacy saying if you looked up political opportunism in the dictionary, Kirsten Gillibrand's photo would be next to it. From jumping on the abolish ICE bandwagon to turning on the Clintons, she always goes where the political wind blows. How do you respond to that?
Well, those are political attacks, so not rooted in any truth. But, you know, I am who I am, and I will fight for other people's kids as hard as I fight for my own. My heart has never changed, and I will fight for people.
But some of your agenda has, which is what they're attacking there.
10 years ago, when I became senator of New York State, a state of 20 million people, I recognized that my focus on the concerns of my upstate district were not enough. I needed to focus on the concerns of the whole state. And so on immigration, I spent time in immigrant communities. Nydia Velasquez took me to her district in Brooklyn, and I met with families whose lives were being torn apart because of policies that I did not have enough compassion and empathy for. So I recognized I was wrong.
You sit on the Armed Services Committee. If you are Commander-in-Chief, would you continue the diplomatic talks with North Korea that the president has started?
So I think it is helpful that President Trump is focused on diplomacy and not bombing North Korea, because one of his earlier thought processes were that he needed to have military action, which caused grave concern in my mind and those of many other senators. So I do think diplomacy and engagement is the right approach. Unfortunately, President Trump, in his first efforts, I think it was much more of a political stunt than effective diplomacy and political dialogue.
So you don't support the second summit?
No, I am grateful because he is choosing a path of diplomacy, even if he's not good at it, or even if it's not more than a political stunt. I'm still grateful that that is his choice, as opposed to bombing North Korea.
You have spoken about your agenda, which would include expanding Medicare for all. You had been a co-sponsor on a bill with Bernie Sanders previously that would essentially nationalize health care. That would require an estimated $1.4 trillion a year. How do you finance that?
The biggest worry almost every family in America has is the cost of health care, and that it will be out of reach for them because the insurance industry doesn't care. So the reason why I believe in Medicare for all is I think any family should have access to at least one not-for-profit public option so they can compete with the for-profit insurance industry that just has to make their quarterly profits and pay their shareholders value and make sure their CEOs make millions of dollars. That is not aligned with the goal of universal coverage that's good and affordable.
How do you pay for it?
Let me explain. If you buy into Medicare in the same way you buy into your Social Security as an earned benefit, it is far less expensive for every American than the amount of money they are paying now to the insurance industry. So it will be paid for by each person who wants to invest in their health care at a far lower rate they're paying today. And so the bill that Senator Sanders and I and many others introduced, I wrote the part about buying into Medicare because that's what I ran on in 2006 as an upstate New York House candidate in a 2-to-1 Republican district. It made sense to my voters then. It makes sense to voters across America now. Let them buy in. Let them just invest 4% of income, which is what our bill says, to get access in the same way they invest 6% of their income into Social Security. It's the same earned benefit. If you make it a right in this way, if you create it as a social safety net, people will get higher quality care that is less expensive, and they will always be covered. No insurance company can deny them because of pre-existing conditions.
Senator, we'll be watching your campaign. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.
Thank you. I'll see you soon.
As the U.S. withdrawal from Syria continued this week, a suicide attack in the northern city of Manbij claimed the lives of 4 Americans. President Trump traveled to Dover Air Force Base Saturday to pay his respects. It was the deadliest single attack on U.S. forces since the conflict began more than 4 years ago. CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata filed this report from northern Syria.
We joined soldiers of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces on the front line and the last pocket of ISIS territory to see troops firing a barrage of mortars toward ISIS positions. Right beside them, U.S. forces opening fire too. Commander Simko Shkak told us the U.S. military has been indispensable in providing artillery and vital airstrikes. Yet ISIS has proven a persistent enemy, launching counterattacks, including truck bombs. And the suicide bombing that took the lives of 4 Americans and more than a dozen other people, evidence that ISIS is already evolving from a territorial force to an underground terror network. Which all makes it harder for America's allies here to understand the decision to withdraw 2,000 U.S. troops at such a critical time. We fought this war together, Commander Nouri Mahmoud told us. America has a responsibility to support us and not suddenly abandon us. They fear that a withdrawal of U.S. forces would leave a security vacuum, allowing Turkey, who sees Kurdish forces as terrorists, to invade, and ISIS to regroup, calling into question the fate of thousands of ISIS detainees held by the SDF.
In addition to ISIS prisoners, is the question of what to do with their families, the wives and children of ISIS who are now stuck in refugee camps, including a lot of foreigners.
Children born to the wrong fathers in the wrong place at the wrong time face what everybody here shares, a future that promises nothing but uncertainty.
That was Charlie D'Agata reporting from northern Syria. We'd like to now welcome Brett McGurk. He was President Trump's envoy to the global coalition fighting ISIS, but he resigned last month in protest following the president's decision to withdraw from Syria. And in an op-ed this week, he warned America's decision to pull out is giving the terror group new life. Brett, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Margaret.
The vice president sat here and reiterated that ISIS is defeated. Is he correct?
Well, they're not defeated. I've been part of this campaign for 4 years across 2 administrations. We've come an extraordinarily long way. And in 2014, this organization controlled territory of 8 million Syrians and Iraqis. It was committing genocide against Christians and Yazidis and minority groups. It was planning attacks against us in the homeland. It was carrying them out in Paris. It killed Americans in Brussels and Paris. We've come a long way. We have taken away a lot of their physical space. But we always said, and our policy was, until most recently, we had to make sure that we completed the enduring defeat of ISIS. What that meant was taking away their physical space and retaining a presence so they could not resurge. And what just happened was that policy was really just reversed overnight. So as a leader of the coalition, we've been telling our partners on the ground and around the world, we built a coalition of 75 countries, that we were prepared to stay in Syria for some time. And on instructions from the White House, we were telling them we would stay in Syria until we completed the enduring defeat of ISIS, not just the physical territory. We'd stay in Syria until the Iranians left Syria, and also until there was a irreversible political progress in Geneva to end the ultimate civil war. We had told that to our partners on the ground. We had told that to our coalition partners, and it was reversed. in a conversation between the president and a foreign leader. Leadership, American leadership really counts. Leadership built this coalition. It led to these gains against ISIS, and leadership requires some presence on the ground and also consistency. And it was the total reversal of our policy that made it, I concluded I could not be effective in carrying out those new instructions.
We should point out, you joined the State Department under President Bush. You then served under President Obama and then under President Trump. Can you clarify there? I point that out because you served Democrats and Republicans. Why did you resign specifically?
Well, again, I did.
The president has alleged it's political.
Well, I've served all three administrations. I've worked on policies that I fully supported. You work on policies during the government that you might not support. You argue your case. In this case, I think the entire national security team had one view, and the president, in a conversation with President Erdogan, just completely reversed the policy. The president has said, I think he's right, you never telegraph a punch when you're in a military campaign. You also don't telegraph your retreat. I've probably traveled to Syria more than any other American civilian official. I know our people in Syria. My heart is broken, and our thoughts are with the families and loved ones of those just killed. In this campaign in Syria since 2015, we've had 2 Americans killed in action. We built this campaign plan to answer for those who believe that we should not be overinvested in these conflicts. Americans are not fighting. We built a force of 60,000 Syrians to do the fighting. American taxpayers are not spending money on civilian stabilization and reconstruction costs. The coalition is doing that. Mm-hmm. So it was a sustainable campaign plan, and we had the pieces in place as we defeated the physical caliphate to begin a very serious negotiation with some pretty hostile actors in Syria, including Russia. And we had worked with the Russians diplomatically, basically to draw lines on the map at the Euphrates River, and we said, look, you don't cross that river. If you cross that river, we'll kill you.
And we have a map we can put up just so people understand that what you're saying is actually having a real-world impact on the ground, what President Trump did, and possibly lose the territory that the U.S. has cleared out?
Well, the minute you announce to the world that you're leaving, a vacuum opens up and all the other powers in the region start making different calculations. And we have to work things out in Syria with Russia, and our presence on the ground matters. Mm-hmm. And the 2,000 to 3,000 Americans we have on the ground are not just any American soldiers. They are our most elite, most highly trained forces. Again, I visited them from the beginning of the campaign. I was one of the first civilians on the ground way back in the Battle of Kobani. They have done an incredible job. It is those forces that allow the force of the Syrian Democratic Forces with 60,000 Syrians that we have helped build and enable. They allow that force to be effective. If you simply pull out American forces without a plan for what comes next, it is going to open up a significant vacuum. I know the Vice President said we're going to look for coalition partners to take our place. As the former leader of the coalition, I just don't think that that is credible. I know what it takes in these coalition capitals for them to put their blood and treasure on the line with us. It takes American leadership and it takes American presence. And we've just told the world that we're no longer going to be present. So it'll have a dramatic ramification. And that's why what I wrote in the Washington Post, I think we have to really accept some hard truths. I think, number one, we are leaving. The president's made that clear. We are leaving. And that means our force should be really with one mission, to get out and get out safely. We cannot add additional missions onto our force while they are trying to withdraw under pressure, because withdrawing under pressure from a combat zone is one of the most difficult military maneuvers we can ask our people to do.
And I think what you're sketching out here is, to put it plainly, how we withdraw. Accept that the president's mind is made up. But one of the issues you have here is that the way the president is doing this puts forces at risk and puts the gains at risk. Am I hearing you correctly?
Announcing you're going to withdraw and without a plan, and believe me, there's no plan for what's coming next. Right now, we do not have a plan. It increases the vulnerability of our force. It increases the environment on the ground in Syria. This environment in northeast Syria has been fairly permissive and safe. Again, I've been there almost 20 times, and we have been very careful with this. It is increasing the risk to our people on the ground in Syria, and it will open up space for ISIS. But what's most important is we cannot expect a partner such as Turkey to come in and take our place, or another coalition partner to take our place. That is not realistic. And if our forces are under order to withdraw, as at the same time they are trying to find some formula for another coalition partner to come in, that is not workable. That is not a viable plan.
So when the Secretary of State says the U.S. military can strike ISIS or any threat in Syria from anywhere, you're saying that's not actually the case. Being on the ground matters.
Well, having a presence on the ground is the critical force multiplier that has allowed us to defeat ISIS's physical space, to give us the intelligence to keep pressure on them, and pulling out all of those forces will have very significant repercussions, which we need to be ready for.
Okay, Brett, stay with us if you would. We'll be back in a moment. We're back now with Brett McGurk, and we'd like to also welcome Jason Rezaian to the discussion. He's a global opinions writer for The Washington Post, whose new book, Prisoner, is a gripping account of the 544 days he spent in an Iranian prison. And we have you both here because I think it's pretty interesting for us to talk to you at the same time the guy who negotiated your release is to the right of you. I don't think that's happened before. And Jason, it's good to see you in person as someone who covered your captivity.
Thanks for having me on.
One of the new details I learned in the book was just why you were arrested in the first place, and one of the more sort of absurd things you were told. The story has to do with avocados. Can you explain that?
Yes, in 2011, I put up a Kickstarter project, the crowdfunding website, to raise funds to bring avocados to Iran. I was trying to make a point, kind of tongue-in-cheek, about the fact that Iran is a country that's been isolated for so many years, and one of the manifestations of that is that they've been cut off from the world, and the great joys of the world, one of them being avocados. In the first night of interrogations, I was told that this was definitive proof that I was a spy. They didn't know what an avocado was, what this meant, what this was code for, but it was clearly something very nefarious. And I had to fight against that for 544 days.
That kind of misunderstanding
Exactly.
as to why you were there. And you write about, for 40 years now, the U.S. and Iran have had extensive tension and arguments for a variety of reasons. One of them, the repeated taking of hostages or prisoners. But the word hostage was something that your captors really didn't like hearing.
No, they don't like hearing that at all, and I think you can ask Brett what they think about that term in terms of how they take dual nationals and foreign nationals and put them through a quasi-judicial process. They don't like the idea, but I think that it's been as I write in the book, a 40-year industry for them that they continue to do. I'm part of a long line of people that started in 1979 with our American diplomats that were taken hostage. And unfortunately, the trend has continued today. About 3 weeks from now, the Islamic Republic will be marking its 40th year in existence. Just in the last 2 weeks, we've heard about another American, a Navy veteran, being held. So it didn't start with me, it didn't end with me, but it's something that obviously is heartbreaking to Americans and should stop.
Brett, as someone who negotiated with Iran for the release of Jason and others, how difficult is it to actually have a prisoner swap or any kind of agreement? Since we have those Americans there now, do you think enough is being done?
First of all, it's great to be here with Jason. Jason's book is terrific. It really brings you inside the mind of what Americans are going through in these prisons all around the world. In our process, it wasn't just Jason, about 5 other Americans. Jason was facing a potential death sentence. A U.S. Marine had been sentenced to death. It was reduced. He'd be in prison for another 5 or 6 years, and an American pastor, similar situation. So my negotiation was really the first that I'm aware of with the really hardline element of the Iranian regime, not Foreign Minister Zarif, President Rouhani, the really hardline element of the regime. We knew when they opened this channel, when I saw who I would be meeting with, that, yeah, these are the guys that would hold the prison keys for Jason and the other Americans. It was an incredibly intense 14-month process. There's absolutely no trust, obviously. There is extreme hostility. I don't know how many times I walked away from the table, raising my voice significantly. The Swiss helped facilitate this process. We're very grateful for Switzerland, but they were never in the room, but they'd be down the hall. But oftentimes they would actually come in the room because it was so heated during these talks. And the Iranians, because there's such a lack of trust, tried to renege on this deal all the way until the final moments. And in fact, until Jason and the other Americans and Jason's wife, who was a part of the deal, we wrote her into the deal, were on a plane and out of Iranian airspace, we still did not have confidence that this would actually happen. They tried to renege just the night before we got Jason on a plane, and we couldn't find Jason's wife. It was quite dramatic, but that was because of the fiefdom, the different competition within the Iranian regime itself. You never quite know, are you talking to the right guy? In my process, we were talking to the right guy, and I was the first American they had ever met, and it was incredibly difficult. but it's the kind of hard diplomacy you have to do to get things done in the world.
Well, in that swap, one of the things that people remember from that is the fact that you were released the same day the nuclear deal with Iran went into effect, and this transfer of money from a financial dispute between the U.S. and Iran went through about $1.7, $1.8 billion and became this legendary story of a plane full of cash. What is the truth there?
Yeah, there's so much nonsense about this. So there was a lot of diplomacy going on with Iran at the time. The nuclear track, the track with Jason and the prisoners. And then in parallel, lawyers who've been negotiating under the Hague Tribunal for 30 years. We have lawyers at the State Department. They're probably now not getting paid given the situation in Washington. But they've been negotiating with Iran for 30 years on these cases. And the lawyers that did that transaction have been doing these transactions for 30 years. The Iranians have actually paid us $2.5 billion through these Hague settlements. So there was a settlement of a claim that we, the Americans, had to pay Iran. It's $400 million that Iran had given us. We were going to have to give them that money. There was a question of the interest, and it was settled by those professional attorneys. This all came to a head at the same time, and I was as a leader in Geneva at the time, I made very clear nothing should happen.
But this, to a lot of people, this looks like cash for hostages. To Jason's point, this has been an industry for the country.
It was a totally separate negotiation strand, had nothing to do with Jason's release. But at the end, when the Iranians tried to renege on returning Jason and returning his wife, made very clear that nothing should go through on anything until all the Americans are on a plane.
Jason, do you think the U.S. government should be negotiating for the release of the Americans who are there now?
Without a doubt. I mean, if we're not negotiating for their release, they're going to be there for a very long time. I had a message from one of the other gentleman who was released with me not too long ago when we heard about the case of another American being held, and he said, you know, I'm really happy that we got released during the last administration. There is no direct negotiation going on with Iran right now between the United States and Iran. That's one of the byproducts of the Trump administration's decision to leave the nuclear deal. Mm-hmm. And without those sorts of talks going on, there's no way, there's no mechanism to bring them home. And I think that we have to bring them home. It's an imperative matter of right and wrong, right? Mm-hmm. We don't leave Americans behind. We hear that all the time. The Trump administration has been pretty good about bringing people home from other countries, but Iran is a black spot on their record. And unfortunately, some of the same people who were so adamant about not negotiating with Iran over the nuclear issue while myself and others were being held in prison have gone completely silent on this issue. And I'd like to bring it back to the forefront.
And we
if
should
Jason
say
wasn't released at that moment, he'd still be in jail. There's no question.
And there are still at least 4 Americans there. We'll be right back. Thanks to both of you. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.